Velis has just been announced. He's about to come. It's the Ice Warrior of the Crystal, and he's a unit that's a little bit under the radar in the JP side. He is a top tier healer. He's got great supportive capabilities with haste, and then on top of that, he can deal decent damage in a nutshell. So he can do a bit of everything, but he's not a unit that's going to win the fight by himself like the Starlet Elenas or the Ibaras of this world. So that's really not his role. Today, we are going to be talking about his kit, what he does, strengths, weaknesses, and just generally whether he's worth the viz right now, because we are in a pretty expensive period in War of the Visions. So, as the Ice Crystal Warrior, he is a cost 100 unit, and that's something that's a little bit against him, because usually your cost 100 units, you want them to be your strongest damage dealers, or the units that will win the fights, whereas he's a support, so he's kind of a piece of the puzzle, but not the primary guy that's going to be your win condition in a team, and still has a cost of 100. So in any type of cost-restricted content, I think he's going to be super hard to place in your team. He's got his new unique job, just like the other Crystal Warriors, and on top of that, Scholar and Arithmetician. So he really he uses a book as his main weapon, standard movement of 3-1. He's not very mobile, nothing in his kit allows him to move better, so that's a little bit of a detriment. And then he's got the typical Ice Mastery ability, where he increases HP and Ice attack, and then he's got an innate negative hate, which is very interesting. As long as he doesn't hit the enemy team, he won't be the primary target. It could be something you play around. And then he's got a decently good cast time, but pretty much all his abilities have a cast time. So as much as it is a good thing in his Mastery ability, overall having cast times is now considered a detriment in my book in War of the Visions. Velis's TMR might be something that influences you a little bit into pulling. It is a great piece of gear. Unfortunately, it's really only mage types units that can equip it, so that is something to keep in mind, but it has a great stat line, some defense, spirit, and accuracy, and the ability that can be activated twice will give 10 AP to everybody around you, and then decrease their AP consumption for 3 turns. It's not as much as Bells, where you just use it once, and that unit doesn't have to worry about AP consumption, but I like having this on a mage if you are running other physical attackers, because it makes them consume their AP a lot less quickly, and so that could be very relevant in some matchups, maybe in a small map where you don't have time to use bells, so you want to make your attacker hit from turn 1 and then not run out immediately. I could see some really good applications for this TMR. As per usual though, it's not worth pulling a unit just for the TMR, unless it's Kane's Helmet or the Re-Raise TMR perhaps, but these are the only two in my opinion that you should really pull for because of the TMR. Then, in terms of stats, Velis is a little bit above the Black Rose Helenas and Renown of this world in my opinion. He's got a little bit less HP, but some defense, some spirit, innately 67 agility is crazy. It's one of the fastest mages out there, and then 573 magic, so his magic is also through the roof. So overall, really good stat lines. He does not have the best of resistances, but he does have positive resistances to slash and magic, and then only a weakness to striking, which never really matters. There aren't a lot of striking units out there in the game. And then some resistance to paralysis and sleep, not the most common of status effects, so this is not that great. What really makes him good, in my opinion, is the fact he's so fast, because you love having supports go before your attackers, because then they often have time to cast 2 spells or 2 buffs before the other guys go in. So this is a major edge for him. Then, if we look at his kit, he also has some pretty insane passives. The first one, you always want that. It gives him Spirit, Healing Power, and Area Resistance. It's just 3 great passives all stacked together at once. That's kind of hard to pass by. Outside of that, I think I would use Color's Knowledge more often than not, because it gives him extra defense and accuracy, and we know how terrible lack of accuracy is right now with all these evasions units running around. But you could also just go for some extra magic if you want better heals or influence the height of his arithmetician skills. So there are some options out there, but I think the top 2 passives are what you'll run in most scenarios. Then, in terms of counter abilities, he's got 2 of them that absorb damage back, just like the Arithmetician counter. It's a little bit different because his main job counter is a magic type attack, so it is going to scale with magic attack up, whereas the other one that's typeless is not going to do that. But the mod is very high at 121, and it also has more range, so more scenarios where you're going to have a chance to proc it. So overall, I would just equip his anti-ice healing, or whatever the global name is for his main job counter. Now finally, let's look at his main job, and it is stacked with a bunch of good stuff. There is one common thing though, pretty much every single ability in this kit has a cast time and is reflectable, so that's something to be very wary of if you're fighting an enemy like Celeste. She's just going to absorb every offensive hit, and then if you're fighting enemies that are super fast, you might not have time to finish casting before they hit you, and that can result in a wasted turn, or you get stunned or confused, or something that interrupts the spell as well. So there is an inherent level of risk to using a caster like this, but his abilities, if they do go off, are very solid. The first one, his basic ability, does not have a cast time, so that's something, it just does ice damage. Then he's got a self buff that I don't think you'll use very often, because you will want him to use his AoE buffs more often than not. He is mostly a support after all, but if he does cast this, he increases his own magic for 3 turns and gets Protect and Shell, making him very hard to remove. And that's a common theme. This guy does not like dying, so he does have a few ways to stay alive that we'll talk about slowly. Then he's got a super large long-range heal that also restores AP. This is very, very good. It does have one, the main disadvantage over the Arithmetician heals, for example, is that this is not an instant cast. So if you need the heal to go on right away, you might actually turn this off and just have him heal as an Arithmetician instead, depending on what you fight. But if you do have time to finish casting, giving AP back to your guys is just great. And a lot of the good ice units are physical attackers that don't have a ton of AP. So with this, plus his TMR, you can make them work very well even without bells. Then he's got an ability that decreases ice resistance and then deals a 220 mod damage in a single target. This is a very hard hitting ability. It's basically the ice type flare. Again, cast time, counterable, single target, and he's more of a healer than an attacker, so I don't think you'll see that very often, but he does have options that are going to delete enemies off the map, so that's a good thing to have in his kit. Then the next ability, Twin Star Acceleration, is the main reason to run this guy in my opinion. It's going to haste both himself and whoever he targets, and haste is extremely impactful in War of the Visions. If you're the slower team, it allows you to catch up and not get lapped by the enemy team and just chained to death. And then if you're already the faster team, you do get that super lap power and you can chain enemies down a lot more easily. There is no matchup that becomes worse because of haste. It's just always a good status to have. And so having this in his kit is really good. Because it affects 2 people at once, chances are you will have your entire team hasted by the time you meet the enemy team, which is really, really good as well. And then when they do get damaged, he's just going to heal them back to full, make sure they use the entire extent of the haste buff. So that's the main asset of this guy in my opinion. Then if you get him to 120, you get that new ability that has Spirit Penetration on top. Since this guy's main job is not to deal damage, this doesn't seem like that big a deal. If you only use him at 115, you will get good value, but it is another option if you're ever fighting a magic tank like Charlotte. You can still deal decent damage thanks to that. Now, we've looked at all of this. What's really missing from him right now is barriers and guaranteed hits, right? Well, let's take a look at his limit break that kind of solves both of these issues. He's got a pretty long range attack with a 200 mod that is a 100% hit chance and then gives him a 3 times physical barrier. This is insane. It's like Sentinel is already a really good ability. Any guaranteed hit is a very good ability, especially at a 200 mod, and he mixes them together. Now, unfortunately, it's an LB, it only has a single cast, but it is one of the best limit breaks in the game in my opinion, and definitely one that you should max because it increases both the damage and the value of the shield, so it's a really good one to have. Overall with this, I think his kit is really well-rounded, and whichever subjob you pick doesn't matter that much because he's got pretty much everything he needs in his main job. But let's talk about his main subjob. You get a new spell that is going to deal damage and have a chance to frostbite. Now, a 40% phase rate is really high, so I think the chances of landing the frostbite on this is really good, and maybe this would make it worthwhile, but then again, cast time, reflectable, so you might not be able to place this in any fight. Otherwise, you also get another AP skill that will decrease AP and CT on your enemy, which seems interesting, but there are better skills in his main job or in the other sub-jobs in my opinion. So first, secondary sub job is color. If you're running him in a mono ice team, I think this is probably the sub job you will want to run, because on top of being able to haste people, you get the ice attack up and single target resistance buff in an AoE, and then that's a lot of extra damage and bulk for your team, so it's a good buff to have overall. And then individually, he could increase his defense, but he's already got the individual ability in his main job that gives him protect and shell, so that is a little bit redundant. Now, unfortunately, in this job, he doesn't have Law of JOS Simulation, so he doesn't have a striking type move. He's still restricted to only magic type attacks, so that is something to keep in mind. And then outside of that, you have the Arithmetician sub-job. We've seen Little Leela act just everywhere. You know what that job has. But you have the Disable ability, the CT average, and then some attacks in the large AoE and heals in the large AoE. I think in most fights, I would be equipping this because it adds the option of having instant cast abilities, and that can be very impactful in a lot of fights. So this allows you to just heal in a pinch, maybe turn off the main heal and just use this one instead, and that is going to be good for fine-tuning your AI in a lot of scenarios. Now, let's look at a simple ice team, and then this guy is also good in a rainbow team, so we'll talk about that in a second there. But I feel like there's a lot of vision cards, actually, that ice teams can run that are good for characters with a high amount of magic. So you could run the Freyevia vision card that gives you slash resistance for everyone, or just put freezes on him. Put him some magic values through the roof, give extra HP to your entire team, and then start hasting people and going wild. I feel like there's going to be a lot of good compositions with him. The main issue of Ice as an element right now is they don't have a modern tank, so we still have Freyevia, but unlike a lot of other tanks, she is not as good as tanking both physical and magical. And you could compare that to Joom, who actually does take magical punishment fairly well, or Charlotte, who mainly tanks magic, but can still take a couple hits from physical attackers to survive. So I don't know how much we'll see mono Ice teams, but he would definitely be an improvement in virtually any of those. What I think we'll see more often than not is people using him as a rainbow support. So he's going to be there to support your hyper damage carry by hasting them early in the fight or hasting your tank, and then whenever they get hit or your tank gets hit, he makes sure they stay alive. Meanwhile, the Alstoria or Cloud or Ibarra or Starlet Elena that you're using just goes through the entire enemy team with the haste and destroys them. I think that's really the main use we'll see from him, and fortunately as a magic-based unit, there are really good vision cards that he can equip that aren't really element dependent. So you can have the Black Rose of the Battlefield vision card for extra agility for your entire team, which is always good to have. You could equip Typhon on him to increase magic attack across the board and then accuracy as well, or just go Solidus, increase slash resistance for everyone. There's a lot of good combinations where he will just be valuable even if he's not providing you with the element buff for the element of your other guys on your team. So overall, I've said a lot of good about this guy. I don't think he's necessarily worth pulling for, though, depending on your account and your needs. He does seem better than most supports because of just how high value haste is, and fire is still in a weak-ish situation. I see Terra coming out a little bit and slowly killing evasion, but I still don't think fire is the strongest of elements right now, right? He is going to be good in rainbow teams, which is a huge plus for me, because I don't like being locked into using mono-elemental teams, but I don't feel like he's needed, and I'm looking at other stuff that's going to come in the future in with Persona collaboration, and then the potential global exclusive unit, and then Little Leela, so lots of good dark units coming in the near future. I feel like players that are on a budget don't necessarily have to go for him. I feel like if you skip him, you're not going to ever look at a team comp and think, man, if only I had Velis, I would be able to win. He's not that type of unit. He is a good addition, and he allows you to win through better CT and just overwhelming the enemy team by taking turns faster than them and then healing back whenever they do get something off. But he's not a win condition by himself in a unit that you won't be able to build teams around because you don't own him, I think. Overall, I am going to be forced to skip him, even though I'm very hyped by his presence, because I just don't have the Viz right now. I pulled for Ibarra and Yorzazan when they were back, and so that hit my Viz stash pretty hard. I think that players that do get him will be very happy, but again, he's not a unit that's necessary, I think, for most players. So let me know your thoughts. Am I missing the point, or is there something about him that makes him unskippable in your opinion? Let me know. I'd be curious to hear it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching as per usual, guys, and I will be back soon.